Welcome everyone to day 3 of our Technology Adoption Festival. Hopefully you've managed to join us on Monday and Tuesday, but if not, never mind, you're at the best event, you've come to Wednesdays. So this is just a reminder of some of the things that the TiPS project has been involved with over the past nearly 2 years or so. And we've kind of come together now in this week-long festival and sharing some of the insights that we've learnt through the projects. This is a schedule of what's happening this week. So if you'd like to join us, you've still got a chance to come to 2 more sessions on Thursday and Friday as well. But today, the focus is on how to succeed with technology adoption in professional service firms, creating the conditions for adoption. And it was myself, Cara Molyneux from Lancaster University Management School, and Professor James Faulconbridge, who kind of led on this element of the TiPS project. And so we've invited some guest speakers along today to share their insights with you, and we're going to do a variety of different kind of conversation, fireside chats and presentations over the next hour and a half. So we're really pleased that you could join us today. If you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat, and we will kind of check those regularly and hopefully get to see those and respond to them. But also we'll give you an opportunity to raise your hand at some point and put your camera on and come on and ask questions if that's what suits you better. This is just an outline of the 3 different parts of the TiPS project. So there were 3 streams, and the proof of concept accelerator is kind of the focus for today's talks. But the other 2 elements are also listed there with the list of firms that took part. And you could see there that they were kind of spread across the country. And then today's speakers are listed here. So I'll let them introduce themselves to you when they're on screen talking. But there we go, that's the list of us today. And this is an overview of how we're going to kind of proceed. So just James is coming in first with introducing our new Succeed framework. And then we'll speak to David Hymers from Wedlake, Veale, and Matthew Stringer from Stridon about adoption that responds to user needs, followed by engaging with the project and enhancing sustainable innovation, and that's with Claire, a training solicitor, and Martin, an innovation manager from BWV. And then we'll end with Robin Savage from Orbital. She's going to talk to us about their kind of take from engaging with their clients on success stories and the role of technology suppliers in that adoption process. And then, like I say, we'll have time, hopefully at the end, for some Q&A. So I'll stop sharing my slides there and I'll hand over now to James.
Thank you, Cara. So good morning, everybody. Great to have you all with us. I'm just going to share some slides, which I'll put up now. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to start the session this morning by providing you with a bit of a snapshot of what we learned from the TiPS project, but in particular, as Cara mentioned, from our proof of concept acceleration firms. So the 8 firms that were involved in that part of the project are all represented here by beautiful photos. A number of them are on the call today with us, and they're going to present some of the insights and some of the lessons learned from those projects. But before we give them a chance to share their stories and experiences, I want to just say a little bit more about what we did with these firms, and particularly what we learned from them and how it's informing what we're going to talk about this morning. So Cara mentioned what we wanted to talk about today was how to succeed with technology adoption, in particular creating the conditions within the firm that allow projects to be successful. So all of those 8 firms that you just saw developed a proof of concept project that we supported with over a 10-month period. And as part of that, TiPS is both an accelerator to support firms, but is also a research program. We worked closely with all the firms to understand how they were approaching technology adoption and to draw out the insights for us to help develop some lessons from that research. And we're really grateful to all the firms for the help they gave us and the time they spent allowing us to understand how they were approaching adoption, the challenges they faced, but also the things that really worked for them. So what you can see on the slide at the moment is the first version of our Succeed framework, which is built on all the insights that we got from the proof of concept firms, and which in many ways is a kind of chronological story from top to bottom about the approach that leads to successful technology adoption in professional services. So from the top, about setting the strategy and understanding the right project. These were topics that were covered on Monday and Tuesday as part of the festival. Through to communication, engaging with critics, and then wider engagement with the project and how you enhance and develop the ability of the firm to implement technology. There's too much for us to talk about all of that today. As I say, some of the earlier elements were covered earlier in the week in the festival, and some of the latter elements will come out in the next couple of days. What we're going to do today, we're going to draw on the insights and lessons from our panel in relation to 2 of the topics in particular. Right in the centre of this kind of framework of adoption around communication and around critics. And so what I want to do is just spend a couple of minutes just setting up that kind of those topics. And then our panelists will share their different insights into these, how they experience these things in their project, how they support their clients, in the case of Robin from Orbital. And hopefully it'll give you a flavour of some of the things we learned, but also some of the lessons that can be taken away. So I'm going to move through this fairly quickly because our panelists are going to share much more detailed kind of first-hand experiences of some of these issues. But you won't be surprised to hear that communication is important and creates the conditions for adoption. That I'm sure most people take for granted. But what we learned a lot about through the proof of concept projects was about the kind of communication and the approach to communication that's successful. And what we'll hear more about, particularly from David and Matthew shortly, is about an approach that is communication after consultation, about a communication process that builds on deep engagement and consultation with the people that are going to use technology, the fee earners, the professional support staff, whoever it may be. And a really crucial role for a particular approach to engagement that is deep and meaningful and leads to not only the right selection of technology, but also the right kind of engagement from the fee earners, from the professionals, from the support staff that are going to be using the technology. So communication is built on consultation, but it is also a particular kind of communication that hones in on the real benefits that are tangible and meaningful to those that are being communicated with, and addresses the question that we can't escape, which is the what's in it for me question. All of you will know from your own personal experiences that trying to convince fee earners in particular to adopt a new technology has to be approached in a way that talks their language, talks to their interests, and addresses the question of what's in it for me. And we're going to hear from our panel about approaches to developing that kind of communication, both through the consultation process, but also through managing the project and how you engage with people as the project proceeds. What we also saw, and our project revealed really clearly, is about also understanding the right audience for communication. And it isn't a singular audience. It begins with key decision makers and avoiding roadblocks by engaging with members of the board, senior partners, etc. But it goes much further than that. It involves, yes, ultimately communicating with everybody. But we also saw a really crucial role for developing strategies for collaborations and communication and engagement, both between the professionals, the accountants or lawyers or whoever the professional workforce is in the organisation, and the people that are designing and implementing the technology project. So the tech professionals, the IT managers, the CTOs, they need a direct line and direct form of engagement, both with the board, but also with all of the partners and the influential professionals. And they need to build really close and effective relationships to link up the understanding of the business need, the drivers for the fee earners, for the professional support staff, and the capabilities of the technology. So a topic we take for granted in terms of communication, the Succeed framework helps us to start to unpack that a little bit, and that's what our panelists are going to help us do today based on their experiences. The second part we refer to as critics. And on the one hand, that talks exactly as the word suggests to those that really don't want to engage with technology adoption. And we all know that experience, and we all probably know who those people are in our organisation. But our focus on critics goes wider than that and recognises that even actually the most enthusiastic adopters can sometimes become somewhat cynical, disillusioned, or struggle with technology adoption projects. So this is about, again, thinking about that, what the wider engagement project looks like from a number of angles. So it means, yes, focusing on those who are really keen, the early adopters, and who might provide support and peer support and learning for their colleagues. But it also means recognising that those that are critical, those that are resistant, are really important as part of your engagement process as well. You need to learn from them, learn from their concerns, understand their concerns, and make that part of the way that you engage with all of the colleagues in the organisation to ensure adoption is successful. So ignoring critics is not an option. Finding an effective way to engage them is really important. And one of the crucial things that we saw, and again, I'm sure we'll hear more from our panelists today about, is the role of training in all of that. Now, of course, when we often think of training, we often think of something you do online, something you do on your phone, something you do to learn how to do something. Maybe you watch a webinar like today. All of that is important. What we also saw was, and particularly when engaging with those perhaps slightly more cynical or reluctant adopters, is that training when it comes to these new technologies needs to take a particular form. It needs to be training that's responding to some of that fear, that skepticism, the doubt, but it also needs to be really hands-on and practical. Training that's a video of how to do something, often people won't watch the video, or they watch the video but then still can't do it when they try it for themselves. So we saw a really crucial role for supporting everyone, either the enthusiasts but also the critics, with really hands-on practical training that shows them how to use the technology to solve their problems on a day-to-day basis when they're doing their work to address a task that is either too slow, too painful, not high enough quality, make it really practical and problem solving for them. And it starts to respond to some of those fears, those concerns, that reluctance, because they can immediately see the benefit rather than having to find the time to do the training course, then finding they couldn't do it and having to go and ask and seek out further help. And that challenges the way sometimes we think about training, and challenges to think about a multidimensional approach to engaging all of our colleagues, and particularly those that are a little bit more critical and resistant to adoption. So what we hope today is that our speakers are going to share insights into a whole range of topics that talk to what I just covered in terms of communication and critics and engaging the workforce. And doing that in a way that'll help us to understand this journey of adoption and the kind of challenges that will come up along the way, how they can be avoided or how they can be responded to when they emerge, how we can develop a form of communication and engagement with colleagues that really does create the conditions for adoption, that allows the use cases to emerge and to be embraced by as large a pool of people as possible, and leads to a situation where stakeholders feel fully engaged with the project. And that will always be different in different ways for different people, but it creates a space for everybody to engage in a way that's meaningful. So that's the challenge to our panel, really, for the rest of today, is to share some insights from their journey, from their experiences, how they approach these kinds of issues, the methodologies they've used, the stories they can share with us that help us understand either the problems that will arise or the ways of overcoming these problems. So I'm going to be quiet now. I'll hand back to Cara, who will introduce the first part of our kind of panel conversation, where I think David and Matthew are going to share their approach and their learnings about how to deal with some of these issues. So Cara, back to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, James. You've set us up nicely there to move into this fireside chat between David and Matthew. So I will leave it to you guys to introduce yourselves, but we're really grateful for you to come along today to share your really important insights on what's been a very interesting TiPS proof of concept project that you took on. So yeah, really looking forward to kind of hearing how you went about creating the conditions for adoption within the firm. Over to you, David.
Okay, so I'll go first. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm David Hymers. I'm IT Director at Wedlake Veale. We're a full service law firm based in London, approximately 400 people now, and I head up a team of 20 technology professionals.
And I'm Matthew Stringer. I'm the founder and CEO of Stridon, and we're a technology consulting partner working with professional services firms, particularly law firms, both in the UK and in the US. And I get the joy of doing something that I very much love to do every single day, which is helping the clients that we're working with, David, and the organizations to really use technology to fulfill their ambitions and their goals. And we do that, and it's very pertinent today, by placing people at the very centre of our thought process, our methodology, and everything we do. So I look forward to sharing some of the snippets. We have to remember, Dave, we've only got 10 minutes, so don't get too carried away. But maybe maybe you could start with how did we arrive at the latest project that we started to work on?
Yeah, so just a bit of background for everyone. So we've worked with Stridon now since 2016. So they're our key technology partner, and they help us on lots of different projects. But last year we did a strategic technology assessment with them. So that involved Matthew coming in, and he spoke to around 15% of our organization. So it was almost, I think, 60 people in total. And that was all the way from, legal directors, partners, trainees, business support staff, secretaries, a whole gamut of people across the organization. And I think what Matthew was trying to tease out of those people were, what pain points they had in their day-to-day work, what was frustrating them, and also opportunities for us to come along as technology professionals to make their lives better. And really, one of the key themes that came out of that was people struggling to access information easily, key information that they needed to do their roles. And that led on to the TiPS project and what we did with the TiPS project, which we'll go on to shortly. But Matthew, do you remember some of the stuff that the people spoke to you about around that issue?
Yeah, I think it's a good place for us to start. It connects back to what James was saying a minute ago with the introduction of Succeed. It's this direction towards collaboration. And before you start jumping down into projects themselves, it's actually pulling that back and saying, well, first and foremost, let's think of an organization as an onion, and we need to peel back the layers, which involves engaging with people at every single level to be able to build that rich picture of understanding of what's meaningful to them, what's really important. And I think what's fascinating through those processes is quite often, everybody perceives what they do in their daily lives very differently, even if you work in the same firm and you might have the same job. But once you start to engage people, and aside from what feels like half the time a great agony aunt session with some of the folks when we start to engage with them, you start to see some of these themes coming out of an organization where people think they're talking about different problems, but actually you bring them back and they're just perceiving things in slightly different ways. And that is where successful adoption actually starts, is having a really well-entrenched viewpoint as to what are those challenges, what are those opportunities, where can we take them on that journey, and making sure we understand that from different vantage points. And I think that's a critical element of change management, and it will be embedded in Succeed. It's not just about one role or one individual, but we need to create that totality of view. So what we build and what we deliver to people connects with everybody, and it helps us to take them on the journey. And of course, through that process, with the Business Insights project that we then initiated through TiPS, you start to uncover a whole variety of challenges and opportunities that are really anchored around data. And whether that's people with an ability to engage with the right information in a timely manner, whether that's oversaturation, there's this big dashboard full of information, but actually I don't even know what it means, or it takes me too much time to really dig through it. But each individual in their own role requires different things. So that's tricky, right? Because you have to understand, well, what are their needs first before we move on and move into how we solution that. Before we dive too much further into that, I think as we really look at how do you do that, the Business Insights project, of course, was where we introduced the solutioning methodology that we use, which is very much anchored around all of those things that James was talking about at the moment, engagement, the communication side, to really think of it as whichever success you want with an organizational change, but particularly with technology, You have a starting position and you have an end position, and our job is to help people transition from that starting place to the end goal. And this is very much around helping to take people on that journey. Through that collaborative experience, by bringing that, what we refer to as that group of champions, what did you see from your vantage point, David, in terms of what started to make a difference there? Because we obviously had a huge amount of positive feedback, even from the first phase we've delivered out, but what moved the needle? What connects back to that successful adoption?
Yeah, well, I think the really key thing about our project was, I mean, yeah, we picked out that key theme about people struggling to access key information. And we knew that was a real difficulty for people. So we were quite clear on what the goal was for our project. And I think that's just really important when you do any kind of technology project. You have to be very clear that what the problem is you're trying to solve. And so that was very front and center. And then what we did next was, I mean, this project, we ran it completely different to projects in the past. So as Matthew alluded to, we chose a champions group. So this was people who either had complained about difficulty accessing information, or through the conversations Matthew had with the 55 odd people in the business, people who had commented on this theme. And then we carefully chose a group of around 10 people, and again, careful to choose mix of roles as part of that. So we were careful to include secretarial representation into that. And it was just really interesting getting that group of people together in the first place, because often I think what happens with technology projects, and we've been guilty of this in the past, is you build a solution within the IT team. It's almost like a finished product. And then you give it to people, you put it in their hands, almost foist it on them and give them a bit of training and away they go. But we engage people really early on. So there's 10 champions. We didn't even really want to prejudge what the solution was going to look like. We spoke to them first. We were clear about what the scope of the project was, trying to give people key information. And then we listened to what they had to say, what information in particular it was that they needed. Because what we didn't want to do is try and boil the ocean. We didn't want to, because funnily enough, once we started looking into the project, we've already got a whole range of dashboards that people can use. But they're too involved. There's too much information on them. People struggle to use them. And one thing that came out of this project was actually our accounts team had tried to, a couple of years prior to TiPS, tried to build a simplified dashboard for people, but it just never got off the ground. And it really boiled down to, when we spoke to the accounts team, lack of engagement, lack of communication, and that project just died a death. So by forming this champions group and getting them involved from the get-go, and helping them get invested, and they bought into the project, they gave us their input, and we really built the solution around their feedback. I just thought that was a super helpful starting point. Do you agree, Matthew?
It'd be hard for me not to agree. That wouldn't have gone down too well. But yes, I think, and to tie this all back now to thinking about that core question that was posed for this particular session, creating the conditions for adoption, and indeed as you go through that adoption process, and I can pick out a number of aspects there that you spoke about, David, that were some of those game changers. But I think the key message around all of this is you don't need to go from a methodology of how you previously delivered and then engage and have massively scaled up change teams with a whole bunch of new disciplines in there. Neither does this need to be something that takes 12 months to 24 months to bring to fruition. You can start simply in an organization with a smaller scaled down approach. And I think Succeed from TiPS has actually great guidance for people on how to do that, and it's where our solution methodology was devised for many years ago, to really bring that into that space where our clients are typically not people with huge amounts of change team or change management experience. So it's, what are the human components here? What are the people elements that we know exist around lack of engagement, the communication side? We know where our critics are. It's great to see that so much of that has now been embedded into the Succeed model. And that's really what makes that difference, I think, when it comes down to adoption, is bringing people on that journey, helping your small group of champions that you bring together. Sometimes that will involve critics. If you can move beyond a critic and turn them into your greatest champion, you imagine the power that has as you start to then bring these innovation drives into your organization, people will sit up and take note of that. But those folks that engage help to fine tune, they help to refine what we're building. So it is intrinsically connected to the things that they need to be solved in the everyday. And then instead, when you launch technology and you foist that upon your organization, it's not just something that's a diktat from the technology team. It's actually something that can come from your senior stakeholders or champions who are behind it. They're invested into that process and they've helped you to actually refine what you're doing. And that amplification, that positive energy that comes through all of that, not only then delivers stronger outcomes, but you see naturally adoption levels of up. It changes positive impact on employee experience, how people feel with technology. And as we're doing now, of course, we're leveraging that energy to move further and quicker with larger scale technology adoption and innovation, because it's created the right foundation. So I think for anyone that's looking to drive change and innovation through their firm, take a really good look at Succeed, because there's a lot of rich information and advice that's come from the experience that you've had and we've done together, David, but also from the rest of the firms that have been part of the TiPS project. So yeah, I think we should leave it there. I don't know if Cara or James have any questions or anything to add in to that particular point, but I'll hand it back to you, to both of you.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys. So I suppose one question I've got following up on that, it seems to me like it's really important to create a culture of kind of like acceptance of people's abilities to use the technology. So like, how do you go about making people feel kind of able to openly say, actually, you know, there's an assumption that I'm already skilled at using the dashboard as was or whatever, and actually I now need maybe a bit of upskilling to retrain or to enhance my skills in this kind of like, how do you go about making that the culture in the organization that anyone at any level could kind of raise their hand and say, actually, I need a bit more support?
Yeah, I'll quickly take that one. I mean, we were lucky with our project that way. I mean, the way it turned out was, after consultation with the Champions group, we built a Power BI dashboard, which had key financial information, which was a really pressing need across the firm. So actually, from a training point of view, there was very little required. As I said before, people were already using dashboards. They were just overcomplicated. So it was a similar dashboard, but we were just really careful to scale it right down. We literally just put 4 or 5 bits of information on there to keep it simple, intuitive. It wasn't difficult to use. But in terms of different roles, I mean, one of the people we had on the Champions group was a secretary. And it was really interesting to get her input into the information she might need. Just going back to Matthew's point earlier about, you know, people in different roles need different information. And what the secretary was telling us was, you know, quite often, you know, her fee earners are super busy. They don't have time to do certain admin tasks themselves. So they then delegate it to the secretary. And there's certain information that the secretary needs to do those admin tasks. So we were just very careful to build that into the dashboard. So from a secretarial point of view, because they use the dashboard as well, they go in and see information specifically useful to them to do those delegated tasks.
I think just to add to that, Cara, as well, is one of the reasons why with the Business Insights project is it was designed out to not need that in the first place, to remove one of the barriers, because this was an outcome that doesn't need that. If you create a dashboard that requires engagement and training, we're going to go right back to where we were, which is overcomplicated and cumbersome. But the more general point around it, I think James touched on this with some of the conversational topics beforehand, is that one size fits all simply doesn't work. And traditionally, and I've seen this many times for the last 15 to 20 years, technology is rolled out and a traditional training implementation comes along where you have hours, you must come to an hour session, we're going to teach you everything that you could possibly think you might want to know about this one thing. Then we're going to give you a quick reference guide and we're going to give you a bunch of links and send you on your way, as if you're magically then going to work out the bit where 95% of what you show me, I have no idea why I would even want to use that. So actually it's about bringing that down and personalizing those experiences so that different roles, different groups, it might be different practice groups, they engage and use technology in different ways. And that's part of building that Champions group, is that you understand where that sits and then you can devise and refine training. So by the time you move to a broader rollout, you've already tested it, you've refined it, and you know that it's hitting the mark on it. But you have to personalize those experiences. Otherwise, it just skims across the surface and people will go back to doing exactly what they did yesterday.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, Matthew. Just one final question for you both before we move to the next panel, maybe. But Matthew, you mentioned there about not needing to kind of be scared that you need a whole change management team, you need a whole project management team to kind of engage with these kinds of processes. And for many firms that, you know, are on the smaller side, that is one of the key kind of barriers and challenges. So maybe just say a little bit more about how you can run these kind of processes in a way that doesn't require a big kind of overhead and infrastructure and project team and project plans. I think that's a really important point for lots of the firms we work with about how you make this realistic when you're not a 1,000 people firm kind of thing.
Sure. I think there's two quick elements in that. One is don't be fearful of it, but by doing that, focus on something that is meaningful, but is easy for you to wrap your hands around. So don't immediately go to the biggest possible change project that you could possibly choose and try and run this down for the very first time. And that's actually the strategy we used with Wedlake Veale. Is we introduced a light touch model that was easy to get to grips with, because what we're trying to do as a partner is not just ride in, deliver, and then disappear again. It's partnership. So it's building skills and capability so that as you get exposure to doing these things inside of the firm, you're building up skills and experience that you can rinse and repeat, and then start to move forward with, say, emboldened by your undoubted success, being able to move quicker, faster, and larger. So start simple, start something that you can put your hands around, and of course it'd be remiss if you're looking for knowledge gaps and experience, it would be remiss of me to say I'm on this call because we're working in partnership with David, and that probably links into where Robin will come out later. Creating partnerships is not just about internal, it's about external, but I think you always have to focus on making sure you're creating long-term internal capability for long-term success as a firm.
I would just say something similar, which is, you don't need to produce a perfect solution. That was the temptation when we were building the dashboard before we put it in people's hands. We wanted it to really have a wow factor and almost be perfect. And I think we just got to the point where good was good enough. We just had to get it out there. And with the dashboard, we're hoping to iterate on it going forward. So we've got plans for phase 2 and phase 3 of the dashboard. But I think just don't spend too long dallying on trying to find the perfect solution. Just get it out there, and you can improve it over time.
Really, really great points, and nice links to the enhance and develop bit of the framework, which is all about what you do next and how you learn from one project. And Matthew, you highlighted that really well. And David, your example, phase 2 and 3 can come now, which really builds on what's been learned. So great, thank you. Cara, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah. Okay, great, guys. So thanks for that, and we're going to move on next. Well, yeah, I don't think we've got any questions in the chat, so I'm assuming we're all good to move on. So we're going to introduce now Martin and Claire from VWV. If you can, you're both available, aren't you? Both there? Yeah. Great. I think you're going to be spotlighted. And then the format for this section is James and I are going to pose some questions to you both, so that we kind of get to hear about your TiPS project and the role of the trainees being really heavily involved in that process as well, and the benefits of doing that engagement. So let's start off then. Martin, if you want to introduce yourself first, and then Claire, if you introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the questions.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, hi, my name's Martin. I'm the Innovation Manager at VWV. We're a mid-sized law firm based out of Bristol, but with offices in London, Birmingham and Watford. So a little bit distributed. And my role in the firm is to understand innovation and how we can start delivering innovative change rather than structural or strategic change. So new ideas, creative thinking, that kind of thing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire. I am a trainee solicitor at VWV and was participating in the proof of concept innovation project that Martin led. Currently in my commercial property seat, but I've also done seats in family and then also corporate.
Great. Thanks, guys. So let's kick off then with some questions. I think I'm going to ask you both one question each first, and then James is going to step in. So to you, Martin, if you could just tell us about the TiPS project and why it was really important to engage the trainees kind of from the very start, really, in the design and the and the focus.
So the TiPS project aligned really nicely with an internal innovation initiative we were running at the same time. So we kind of overlaid them together. That project or that initiative was all centered around using and working with our trainees to understand and explore AI and generative AI and its use cases in the firm. We leveraged and we tried to get as much out of the trainees as possible. They were really well placed to learn from both their practice as well as from us in the innovation team. They're really well placed to understand the pain points in the business as they're learning them, and also it's really valuable to have the trainees embedded in the teams, because that really aids in the communication aspects. Part of the structure of the program itself was to deliver on a human-centric approach. So we used the design thinking principles, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And we built a structure of work to use those principles, giving training to the trainees at the initial stages of the program so that they understood both AI fundamentals as well as the core concepts around design thinking and human-centric design, so that they could really like deliver some of the necessary steps to aid in the adoption process down the line. So empathizing with the team and really understanding the pain points meant that the trainees were really capable of addressing challenges and criticism down the line. It also gave them a bit of a structure so that we could work with them to deadlines and milestones within that process. So it was really valuable having dedicated time from a group of lawyers all embedded in discrete areas of the business working in teams. It meant that we were able to really focus our effort onto specific problems and try and deliver some of these solutions.
Yeah, great. Do you want to just tell us, Martin, what it was that you were trying, what the problem was like, and how that was identified, and then the technology that you chose to kind of help with that problem solving?
Yeah, well, the beauty of the program was that it wasn't actually me that chose the solution or identified the problem. It was actually Claire. So maybe Claire's the best person to actually talk about that, because she really led on those conversations.
Sure. And also to say that the project that Martin worked on, there were several groups of trainees, and I was only one of those, part of one of those groups. So at the time, I was in my seat in family, and so we were the private client department. And one of the pain points, we did a survey among the department to see what were the major pain points in their daily work lives, what were the tasks that they really didn't look forward to in their days. And one of those was attendance notes. And so we found, among other solutions, but the one that ended up triumphing was Meeting Insights, which is a AI tool that enables transcriptions of meetings, but then also will generate summaries, to-do tasks, these type of things, so that the more junior colleagues, such as myself and paralegals and secretaries, are not having to spend 2 hours perfecting a accurate attendance note. So that was the project that we worked on.
Great. And so how for you, Claire, was it an enjoyable thing to be part of? And then how do you see being part of this kind of innovation, proof of concept kind of trial, or how's that going to benefit you in your future career as a legal practitioner? And is
Yeah,
it
so
important to have that kind of skill set, this innovation mindset? And
yeah, I would say it was enjoyable, but also challenging. It's definitely it stretched these skills that you wouldn't usually have as a trainee or learn as a trainee. So first of all, it being so early in my career, I was able to lead and take initiative on a project that would impact the whole firm. That came with a lot of challenges in that it was very daunting, very scary, and having to deal with colleagues that were much more senior than me to ask them for their participation. And to do that in a respectful way, I thought was challenging, but then also really built my confidence and then built my personal brand in the firm, which I think is a very unique opportunity for a trainee solicitor. The second thing was that it required more creativity and more lateral thinking than my usual trainee tasks. So instead of drafting a lease or a contract, I was thinking with less boundaries. What type of things could I use in my own personal experience that would help with work? And then finally, it helped me think bigger picture for the firm in terms of the more financial and commercial goals of the firm itself, which is again not something that trainees would usually have access to or would have to think about this early in their careers. And of course, all of these really will help me in my future legal career. So taking initiative on a big project like this would be akin to, being the matter responsible on a client matter, um, using lateral thinking. So instead of just using the same processes that other lawyers have in the past, learning how to adapt and go with more cutting edge solutions, and then thinking about the firm's wider commercial goals will be something that I would need to be thinking about as a partner or as a senior associate, but I'm able to kind of practice those skills so early on in my career.
yeah, great.
Martin, can I ask you maybe to say a bit from your perspective about how you made that possible? So as Claire said, it was challenging. As we heard from Matthew and David earlier, it's something that an environment has to be created to allow people to engage with this. It doesn't just happen. And asking trainees to do something that's about innovation and technology and not just about learning what they need to know for that particular seat is perhaps a bit different to what might normally be the goal of a particular program. So in your experience, what are the things that kind of made that possible, that created that space for people, Claire and her colleagues, to kind of really engage with this and to both learn from it, but also come up with those solutions? Because you say it was Claire and her colleagues that ultimately came up with the idea and the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds simple, but it starts with strategy, right? So going back to your Succeed framework, your first item there is strategy. So as a firm, we've got real core strategies and strategic pillars around best practice and smarter working and being innovative, and that directly fed down through the senior leadership of the firm into me, and we've set a firm-wide objective of innovation to make innovation as part of our DNA. And what that means by setting that tone is that when I'm having conversations with the heads of departments or directors in the firm and saying we want to engage our trainees or we want to engage other members of the firm, it becomes a very easy conversation because they've got objectives and they've got goals in that same space. So setting that tone at a senior level meant that we had buy-in at every single level. We had no resistance from any of the trainee supervisors or any of the teams that would have been impacted by the trainees being taken out of that legal work, and we only had positive reception from that perspective. So by setting it at that strategic level, it meant that we could essentially fly with the trainees without any kind of dragging back, and kind of detractors along the way.
No, that's really interesting. Nice link back to the S of the Succeed. But we have seen that to be crucial throughout. You start with it. You're doing technology not for technology's sake, but to actually fulfil the strategy and the ambitions of the firm. Claire, from your perspective, so as Martin's alluded to, all of the partners were sort of incentivized to kind of engage with this in the way that Martin described, but I'm sure the solution and the particular problem might not have necessarily always been the one that the partners immediately recognized or immediately felt comfortable with. And you said that was challenging for you and learning how and kind of experiencing that. So can you tell us a bit more about kind of what happened and also how you approached that? Because I'm sure whilst everybody was normally positive, I'm sure there were days where there were people that were a bit less keen on maybe the solution or what was being proposed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so the supervisors are in a tough spot with this because they have this resource, which is, I mean, frankly, cheaper with our hourly rate to help them with their, with the matters themselves, the things that are directly profitable. But at the same time, there's also this project going on that could make their practices much more profitable in the future. And so it's balancing the time and the resource of the trainees. And I think, as Martin said, most people were bought in. They agreed with this strategic, I guess, goal. But sometimes when partners would be, up against it, like there's a deadline and their trainees like, no, sorry, I have to work on this project. There was some resistance, but I think it was a challenging thing for trainees to have to say, no, I've carved out this time for this project, which will help the whole firm. And it, at least from my personal experience, taught me how to communicate those difficult things with a much more senior colleague, but then to also hold that ground and say, no, sorry, I really do need to work on this. But then sometimes also having to say, the innovation project needs to step aside because this is a really good opportunity for me to learn this very discrete, legal, detailed task. So yeah, it was challenging, but I think also something that, I was able to learn very early on in my career.
Okay. Cara, did you want to ask another question?
Cara, I
So
think
Cara,
you're
you're
on mute.
muted.
There you go. Yeah, so okay, I suppose this one to Martin. When the criticisms did come up or people were more resistant, what kind of techniques did you use to communicate kind of the longer term advantages of the project, I suppose? Have you kind of mastered the skill of communication in any way that you should share with us all that helped?
I would never claim that I've mastered any of the techniques, even that I'm using on a daily basis. But yeah, it's definitely a point that you've got to tailor to some of your audience at some point. So the biggest resistor to some of these technologies we were looking at was coming from the kind of compliance and the administration side of the kind of business of law side. And my approach to it was just having lots of regular conversations. The big benefit of building our structure around design thinking meant that we had a fully documented experience of the empathize. So we've had a whole group of people empathize with the problems in the business, which makes it very easy to communicate that there are problems here. They've defined it into discrete elements or problem statements. So actually, I don't actually need to spend too much time in kind of explaining that to some of the detractors or to the challengers, because that work's already been done. So the hard part of communicating is trying to work out what message you're going to make, and Claire and the teams did all that legwork for me, and all I had to do was just have those conversations and trying to alleviate some of the concerns. That there is an element with AI and AI technologies, because it's so new, there's a lot of uncertainty. So some of it's around reassurance that actually some of the considerations of data privacy have been considered, and they are being looked at. And actually, if you're worried about training data and your information going out into the wild, no, actually we've dealt with that one. So there's a lot of reassurance going along. But in terms of techniques, my only real technique is regular and ongoing conversations. there is the flip side of that is on the adoption side, where kind of scale comes into it, and we've tried multiple different ways of solving that problem. It's, you know, it's never a completely solved issue, but things like emails work to an extent, probably quite small. Videos can be really accessible to some personas in the business. One of persona mapping is a useful technique if you're trying to understand who your different people in the business that could be impacted by a piece of technology and how they may respond to it, so you can actually tailor some of your communication materials to it. But personally, in these projects especially, is we've been quite agile and a little bit less structured. So we've learned a lot, and we're actually running the program again, and we'll probably be applying some of these principles to the adoption phases of our projects in the coming months.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so there's a couple of things I'd just kind of like to pick up there. First of all, with you, Claire, so you started to mention kind of some of the benefits, and Martin's talked about kind of working out the different personas, and I'm sure the benefits of this project were different for different people. So you probably personally, you'd be interested to hear, for you, you've talked about this kind of skills, but in terms of your work, you know, what difference has this made to you in your work as a lawyer? But also, how did you think about kind of those different dimensions of the benefits, whether it was talking to a partner, maybe it was talking to kind of a secretary or professional support staff? Just interested, because that's an important part of these projects and how you engage people with them. For different people, there'll be different benefits, different kind of stories. So yeah, just your experiences of personally, but also how you were thinking about other people and how they might benefit.
Yeah. So the benefit of the technology that we used, which I explained earlier, was meeting insights. It was both internal and external, I would say. So the first being that we were able to actually spend time on tackling the to-do tasks that we had derived from a meeting, instead of taking the rest of that afternoon drafting an attendance note, and making sure that it was really detailed and as accurate as possible. And because of that, while we were in the meetings, so sorry, I should say, for context, I was in the family team. And a lot of the time when you're meeting with clients, you're sharing very intimate, you know, details, things about divorces, breakdowns of relationships, issues with taking care of children and that type of thing. And so it enabled my supervisor and I to be a lot more engaged in the meeting, instead of me being head down at a meeting, just mindlessly scribbling down notes, just that I could, you know, make an attendance note. Instead, I was able to engage with the client, so that the client was feeling more comfortable around us, so that they could share this, but then want to work with us in the future, instead of maybe hiding a few details that would be really, really important to litigation in the future. And then finally, like internally, as a trainee, being able to observe and to great detail the way that my supervisor was able to ask certain questions that would be important for the matter in the future, or how she dealt with sensitive information. Instead of having to focus on the note, I was able to look at her and see how she was doing these things, and that progressed my own training very much. So it's from all sides very, very beneficial, this technology. Some of the downsides, I guess, with the technology not being as progressed, being that, you know, you have to double check to make sure that all the information is correct, and because of that, needing to take a mental note as well, maybe not scribbling down the notes as much as before, but just making sure that the AI is correct. So yeah, those are the benefits of technology. Have I answered your question in full?
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think you highlighted the different, from different perspectives, how it can. It's not just about the output. So yes, you got sort of a draft of attendance note, but that wasn't that was one of the benefits. It's the spin-offs that come from it, and sort of linked to that, Martin, you were alluding to it, that of course, and we heard from David and Matthew as well, this idea that, well, one project shouldn't just be viewed in isolation, and it should be a springboard for further things, and it's both about sustaining something. You don't want people to switch off the technology the day after you go away, but also asking what next. And you alluded to that a bit when you said about kind of the things you've learned, taking them forward. So Maybe if you could just say a little bit as we start to wrap up this section about kind of, how you create that more sustainable long-term kind of engagement enhancement in the way that the firm uses and thinks about technology using the projects that you've done.
Yeah, so the projects have been very, very successful in raising a lot of questions in the business. A few of them have progressed through to being adopted, like Claire's project, the TiPS project. But the adoption is not complete, and it's not at the end of the story. So part of the challenge that I have is how do I ensure that all that work that's gone into meeting insights and the adoption we've got up to this point isn't lost. So we're working on identifying an owner for it as a capability, so someone can then own that capability moving forward, and they can champion its adoption and they can champion its use in the firm. Not necessarily from a technical perspective, managing users on and off, but more of a conceptually, we need to be looking at this more actively, and we need to make sure that we're open to continuous change. We're not cordoning off any of the projects that we've delivered so far from the trainees that are going through the program this year. So we could look at this again, and actually, if we can deliver more value with a different product, we need to be open to that. There is a big open question in the firm about how we transition an innovation project into a firm business as usual project, because we can't own this forever. It's not a new idea forever. We need to make sure that there's the right resource and the right information's been captured in the right way and it's been delivered in the right way, so that actually we can make sure that it's just a part of our technology landscape moving forward, so that when I'm working with Claire and the other trainees this year, we can just be comfortable that it's looked after. And that transition isn't fully defined yet, and we're trying to engage with all the different stakeholders and come to a shared understanding about what that handover process and transition looks like. But it's absolutely one of my personal major priorities this year, is to make sure that sustainability element of this is fully supported. There's no point going through innovation and coming up with an idea like our previous speakers have said, if it just dies and falls off a cliff. We need to make sure that we're not just having a up the hill and down the hill. We're actually raising the bar, and actually we're raising the level of our competency. So that's a major objective I've got this year, and we're trying to tackle it through the usual ways. We set a strategy, and we're communicating and engaging with all the people, and hopefully we're going to come to a solution soon.
Great, thank you, Martin.
Thanks both. Really appreciate your time and for sharing those insights with us. So I will move now onto the final section of today's session, and delighted to introduce, actually before we do move on, are there any questions? I should give an opportunity. There aren't any in the chat box, so I'm assuming not, but then we can come back at the end and open up the floor to everybody. So I'll carry on. So I'm going to move over to Robin Savage, who's Director of Customer Experience at Orbital, and Robin has very kindly agreed to come along today as one of the technology kind of suppliers, providers in the market. And we were introduced to Robin during the TiPS project because she's the provider to one of the firms that's taken part, FBC Manby Bowdler. So I will hand the floor over to Robin and look forward to seeing your presentation. So yeah, over to you, Robin.
Perfect. Okay, so is my audio coming through already? Right, that's probably the first important check.
Yeah, can see the slides and can hear you fine. Great
stuff. Okay, well, thank you very much, Cara, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Robin Savage, as you can see up there on screen with a nice cheesy grin. I am Director of Customer Experience at a firm called Orbital, who I'm going to talk a bit more about in just a second, but it's nice to see so many familiar faces, lots of law firms in the audience, and especially Wedlake, Bell and VWV. So yeah, lots of familiar faces floating around. So I guess before I jump into the presentation itself, a bit of context and background on myself. I have always worked in the sort of technology space. I started off my career at Google before moving out of that environment and spent the last 10 years working for various AI businesses where I've been responsible for helping the firms who use our technology to adopt it. So hopefully incredibly relevant context for some of the topics we're going to discuss. Now, over that time, of course, AI has evolved dramatically. There's no one who exists in any sort of public space that wouldn't be aware of those headlines. But really, what I'm going to try and articulate is that many of the relatively simple and quite easy to implement tactics that were relevant 10 years ago are still relevant today, as long as you are considered in the way that you apply them. So we're going to try and go through some really nice, simple, easy tactics that are very additive to so many of the themes that speakers today have spoken about. And it was very encouraging to hear such progressive and mature viewpoints from firms that we work with and hopefully others can learn from as well. So if I tick over onto my next slide, just a quick bit of context on Orbital before I dive into the sort of meat of the presentation. For anyone who hasn't heard of us already, we are a technology organization who automate diligence for real estate. So we have 3 core products that are out in the market. You may have heard of them: Orbital Copilot, Orbital Witness, Orbital Residential. It completely depends on the type of organization you are as to whether or not they're relevant. Are you specializing in commercial or residential real estate? But those are the 3 we serve. But probably what's most important is thinking about the 70 plus people behind the scenes who make up the company and who build those. So we are a collective team of over 70 AI engineers, data scientists, and many sort of ex-practicing real estate lawyers and non-real estate specialisms who are responsible for behind the scenes stitching together everything that's incredibly complicated and making it as easy as possible for the companies who purchase our technology to use. To give you maybe a little bit of a sense of scale, today we're used by over 5,000 real estate lawyers collectively, and in the last year we were used on over 100,000 transactions. So we're doing quite a lot of work, and you learn a lot through that process. Just to maybe add a bit of clarity around what we mean when we say building, we are a multimodal technology. So our technologists are responsible for taking all the best bits of all the new and very innovative and advanced technologies that are coming out in the AI and LLM space. We tie those all together, and our customers shouldn't have to worry about it because we've had them jump for them. Then finally, for a bit of a flavour in terms of the types of firms we work with, I'm sure there are some familiar names up there. We work with organisations across all size and scale on the spectrum, not just law firms, anyone involved in the sort of real estate ecosystem. So you'll see a number of the larger players there, global law firms, and we operate both in the UK and the US. But also a very substantial part of our customer base are the mid-size or smaller, more boutique outfits. And actually something that I personally have really loved being a part of over the last year or so is how AI, when it's used well, actually really democratizes and allows some of these smaller, more nimble players to bid for work and be part of initiatives that previously they were sort of outpaced by when on the resources are available in the larger players. So we'll dig into a few of those as themes as well, but basically it's relevant to everyone, and hopefully everyone will find this nice and practical and useful. Okay, now if we cut through all the noise and everything I just told you about the company, what I am basically responsible within the business and the teams that sit underneath me is that we help incredibly busy people. So those tend to be lawyers, but it also could be anyone else within that wider real estate ecosystem. Across those multiple roles, whether they are insurers, lenders, agents, surveyors, investors, developers, all sorts of people involved in that transaction process, to adopt what outwardly would seem to be very complex technology, but the intention is that we tie all of those bits together and make it as easy as possible. Now, I've ended here by saying, but ultimately it's not easy. There's a reason why my job exists within the firm. There's a reason why all of us are here today, sharing knowledge and coming together to discuss these themes, because even though there are consistencies, we are having to innovate and to sort of think differently every time. So it's reassuring, hopefully, for anyone who's come across a technology product and at first not known where to even start, to actually say that all of us are having to be intentional about this. But the good news is there's actually a lot that can be lifted and shifted and repurposed and seems to be relevant across the spectrum. Okay, so a bit of context on what we're going to cover. First off, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about whether generative AI tools require a slightly different approach. So we're here today talking about collective product adoption, but actually AI tools, I think, are the one that are generally front of mind for most people here. And then finally, we're going to talk about 3 Ps or 3 key approaches that have worked particularly well for us at Orbital, all of these have been selected because they should be really nice and easy to incorporate. They're very actionable, and really they should be relevant to most of the technologies we're here talking about. So by no means something that you need to, specialize in real estate or specialize in due diligence. These are generalist and intentionally designed to be that way. Okay, so are Gen AI tools different? Now, I wonder if, or I anticipate most people have seen an S-curve before. For anyone who hasn't, it's basically a way of looking at the typical sort of evolution of a technology as it matures in market. So what this diagram shows are a few of the sort of very much like agreed big disruptive technologies that have evolved over the last few decades. So specifically mainframes, PCs, web open source, smartphone cloud, and most recently generative AI. All of these technologies, when they first arrived, felt completely disruptive. They turned everything on its head, but actually over time, they become increasingly more sort of utilized and therefore less intimidating as an adjustment. So when we talk about the shape of the S, what we're basically illustrating is as a product evolves over time, we start off in this initial phase where it's growing, maybe at a relatively fast clip compared to what you've seen before, but ultimately it's sort of incrementally growing, and people are working out, why is this useful? Once we got to that point, the sort of momentum tends to ramp up and people get very excited. It starts being more regularly used. We see growth and adoption really ramp up. And then over time, it becomes completely normalized and it's considered boring. So just to give you a few examples of where these might fit in, if we think about smartphones, when these first came out, it was incredibly disruptive. No one knew what they were doing. But nowadays, I would hazard a guess that every single person on this call has a smartphone in your pocket, and we don't really need to think much about training people on them or encouraging people about why it's necessary to incorporate them. If we go back about 10 years, machine learning was sort of coming through. It's on its way to being boring. I think it probably depends on who you're asking this to. Our CTO, Andrew, would definitely say so, but I'm sure there's many others who still think it's pretty exciting and innovative. But it's something that's become a lot more normalized, and we don't have to be so intentional about how it's incorporated. Now, generative AI is much earlier in that journey. And I think actually the rate at which people have started to realize how useful it is perhaps faster than with some of these other technologies. But undeniably, we are still in a phase where we need to be incredibly intentional and supportive as people work out how this fits into their day-to-day, because it is a massive change, especially when we're thinking about industries that have existed in a certain way for a very long time. So overall, this is the S-curve. I think it was a diagram that came out of a kind of McKinsey consultant originally, but it just helps us to understand how new and how early generative AI is in that overall flow that we tend to see technology go through. So if we think about generative AI as, yes, very new, very innovative, but ultimately just the latest in a series of S-curves that ultimately we tend to go on and get used to, actually what's quite interesting is you can look at this and say, maybe this isn't so intimidating. Actually, as a society, we have evolved and developed practices that help us to adapt to different significant changes over time. And actually, I would say that's something we've really, really felt at Orbital, is that even though the technology is even more advanced than it ever has been before, actually what we've really doubled down on and spent even more time sort of being intentional about is those back to basics adoption tactics that interweave a lot of the themes that have come through today already. So I'm going to take you through 3 of them, but a few just little bits of context I would keep in mind as we go through. First off, I think everyone will be hyper aware. We are existing in a very, very different world post-COVID that now often means we are existing or learning or working in spaces that are not in the same physical location. So that's something to be incredibly conscious of and is very relevant to the first thing I'm going to talk through. The second is that there are a lot of technologies out there, and we are asking a lot often of our employees within businesses or, specifically fee earners, if we're thinking about a law firm. They may have been introduced to 5 different AI technologies that everyone said is going to change their life in the last sort of 3 weeks. And as a result, people are tired. They're becoming a little bit apathetic as they're increasingly being told they need to do more. And therefore, there's a level of empathy and understanding we need to have in making sure that people are not overwhelmed and that they're giving the right level of information versus being completely overwhelmed when the whole point of introducing this technology is to help make their lives easier, not harder. Then finally, and I think we've again sort of skirted around or weaved through this topic a little bit with the previous speakers, there is a lot of variance inside each firm with regards to each individual's technological appetite. So firms, I think you could pretty much plot themselves on that overall curve in the sense of some are very keen to be sort of first movers, early adopters, others prefer to take a little bit more of a cautious approach. But even within one firm, there is so much differentiation, both across seniority tiers and also just personal characteristics as to how willing or not someone might be to engage in a process at the start, that these are three things we need to be really, really conscious of when we're designing effective programs that should help to effectively drive out and, drive the value we've ultimately intended to do so from these new tools we're implementing. So number one, and this one really is pretty simple, and I don't mean to state the obvious, but we really have doubled down on the importance of preparation. So my team at Orbital are running, honestly, hundreds of training sessions a month, but we have learned that selectively, it is the singular most powerful thing is getting to know the people that you're going to go and train in advance versus coming in with a template that may be a pretty solid one, but ultimately hasn't been adjusted or sort of considered within the bounds of who we know is going to be there. So what I mean when I say importance of preparation, specifically, we intentionally try to sit down with stakeholders within these firms, and they will tell us, of these 10 people who are going to be there, this person is likely to really enjoy it, this person's likely to be a bit cautious, this person specializes in that kind of work, and all of these data points can come together, even though we might not tailor every single bit on that slide that we're then presenting in the training. It means that we have a level of empathy and understanding around the people we need to look out for, the people that we should be conscious of trying to help see things differently, and also try and make sure that the content we're going in to present to them is relevant and engaging and interesting. Because as so many of the speakers today have spoken about, these people are so incredibly busy that if we just talk in generic language that is very focused around our own objectives, there's just no way that people are going to leave that room and then continue to implement these practices. So tailoring content is massive. In addition, doing that preparation allows us to be very intentional about trying to divide up future training groups for relevance. Sometimes that might be by seniority, it might be by specialism. And in addition, we're picking up bits of terminology, we're adjusting our language, and ultimately, hopefully putting together a session that's much more compelling and exciting for the user to be a part of. The final bullet point I've just got here at the end is that my perspective on technology rollout, especially in this day and age, is that it's as much a hearts and minds exercise as it is technical. And that's because the first and most important thing before we get stuck in the nuts and bolts of the technology is to get to know the human beings who are ultimately there to be using it. Okay, so if we wrap up that as approach number one, the next one, our second P, is the priority of time in person. Now, I know I articulated at the beginning of this section that we have all gone in really quite a monumental shift away from always being in the physical office space. But what we have just found at Orbital time and time again is that where it is possible to run at least one of what is potentially multiple touch points in person, it is the singular biggest game changer for actually whether we go on to see those people change their habits and continue to use their technology afterwards. And there are so many factors that play into that. What I've sort of emphasized here at the top of the screen is my personal theory, which is really just minimizing distraction and multi-screening might be one of the core reasons for that. I think everyone knows how difficult it is when you're sitting in a room with a laptop in front of you, an email pops in, even with all the best will in the world, it's very easy to get distracted and popped off. So that at just a very basic level is incredibly important. But secondly, the reason why we really sort of push this is that what we're doing when we're in person in the room with these people is making sure that they're not just listening, they're actually building muscle memory. And we like to get our participants to try and use the technology alongside so that you get through those sort of nitty gritty, oh, I actually can't log in, or actually I've forgotten this, which you just don't uncover unless you're using the technology yourself. And the first bullet point there alludes to the idea that hopefully, and it's not always possible, but we will always try and push for this, we really try and keep those training groups as small as possible, ideally about 10 to 15, and we'll try and have 2 participants from Orbital. And that may seem time intensive at first, but actually the payoff from having been or sort of intentionally putting that energy in at the beginning is really, really substantial. The other points that I've got here down the bottom are about just creating that safe space to ask questions. It's much easier in a room of people that you've spent a bit of time with to actually ask something a bit more organic and natural than sometimes it is to put your hand up on a webinar when you've been sitting off camera. So that is also something that we're really, really encouraging of. We want to minimize the fear and also just build a bit of excitement, like get people engaged, get them chatting. And it's always that section at the end of the training session where people just get stuck into the tool when they're asking the ad hoc questions that really you start to see people have those eureka moments, get excited about what it could do, and ultimately go on to then incorporate it into their day-to-day. The final bullet point I've alluded to here is just acknowledging that, like, in an ideal world, we would run all of these training sessions in person, but that's not always possible. For firms who are much larger, for firms with incredibly distributed teams whereby it's just not possible to come together, we can of course facilitate more flexible setups. Sometimes we run mop-up sessions for people who couldn't attend or otherwise. But when we do so, if possible, we really try and be intentional about requesting cameras on and set those expectations up front, just so it's a valuable use of those participants' time and also a valuable use of our time. Because otherwise, if someone's hidden behind a camera and you can't see them, there's just no saying really how well they've engaged, and actually it's hard to tell if that content's really clicked. Some of the photos you'll see there alongside on the side of the screen are some images we've got from various training sessions. I think these ones were at BCLP, but you'll see that even just a little bit of swag, a little bit of fun, they've got some of the hats in there, people were playing along on their tablets, made all the difference. So the team just really felt like it was an exciting and meaningful start of something bigger versus just, another remote session that they were going to dip in and out of, but may not have really clicked with. Okay, and then final approach from me before we wrap up. What we definitely noticed over time is that even though we are bringing technology that is incredibly exciting in terms of the sophistication of what it's doing, it was quite hard and a little bit intimidating for participants at first to really understand their progression when you go into a tool like ours and there are just so many options available to you. So actually something we've started to experiment with is starting to build a bit of a sense of progression. I've got one illustration up here in a slightly more manual way of a checklist or sort of progression framework that you can build that just helps people to understand that we need to walk first, then we can run, then we can fly or crawl, walk, run, whichever dynamics you wish. What that does is breaks down this overall journey that ultimately will get them to advance use of this technology over time into something much more digestible that you can tick through. You get that little dopamine hit when you pass through, and it makes people realize that they have not failed if they don't instantly get to this end result they might see other people on. We're all going at our own pace and we're here to help. And it's so important that they feel like there is a clear pathway and they are progressing and they're learning, even if it takes them a little bit more time than other people. What also are sort of tactics that we use to implement this mindset are actually breaking our training down into a few different phases. Now, we need to be cautious of people's time. No one has time to be doing this on a super regular basis, but we have just chunked up some of our training, especially for parts that might not be relevant to everyone. And I think Matthew was talking about this earlier. Actually, that can be so meaningful because we are being more conscious of people's time and not putting extra work on their plate that they don't need to do. And we actually found that was a pretty simple change that had a really nice effect in terms of people actually engaging and not feeling like there was extra time being implemented into the sessions. Fine. So overall, these are the sort of ways which you break it down. And the final point, and I hope this doesn't come across as too school teachery, but actually setting a bit of homework. We don't have to call it that. It obviously can be phrased however you prefer, but making sure people realize that when they leave that training session, their work is not done. Set the expectation up front and get the mandate from senior individuals within the business. So if you're an external party, it's not just you sort of preaching to the choir. It's actually the individuals who've purchased the technology backing you up. We found that when you give people specific tasks to do afterwards, it reinforces, just again, sort of builds on that muscle memory. That means that in that instance, in a few weeks or months' time, when a super urgent piece of work crosses their desk, they know because they've done it before, and they did so not just on one occasion when you were sitting with them, but also following. So we're nice and diligent in terms of looking and double checking to see whether those tasks have been done. And we really try and lean on individuals within the business to support us, to show them that that's for the benefit of the participants, not just, us being annoying and pestering them afterwards. So I'll just wrap up here, and I know we could honestly talk all day about all the different tactics could be used, but hopefully this has given you a quick sense of a few ideas that really are quite simple to implement that actually help individuals to absorb. What I would go so far as to say that generative AI is just the latest in a series of very undeniably transformative, but S-curves that we will normalize to and get used to. So if we're intentional about creating those conditions for effective adoption, there's no reason why this needs to be more complicated than anything else we've done. And then finally, just to recap on those three we talked about that were particularly helpful for us, the importance of preparation, prioritizing time in person with the firms we work with, and finally building in a sense of progression were very meaningful and helpful for us in helping these firms to realize the benefits that they know they can. Okay, well, I would just wrap up there, but Cara, very happy to speak to any things that you find useful.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Robin. Well, I thought the 3 Ps were a really useful, quick and easy, simple, practical way of thinking about how to get the change to happen and to support firms, and interest in how you as the provider really take a keen interest in making sure that the adoption kind of actually does take place and sticks. And so it's a useful insight, I suppose, to hear from your side, your perspective, what you've seen, because obviously you engage with lots of different firms, and so you've got kind of like an eagle eye view on what's happening in the real world. So yeah, I haven't really got any follow-up question for you. James might have. I thought that was a really interesting presentation.
Yeah, well, what I was going to do was perhaps invite all of our speakers back to the floor, as it were, just as we start to conclude. And then I have got a little challenge for you all, but we'll ask everybody to come back, which will take a little bit of clicking and camera turning on. So just bear with us while we do all of that. There we go. That's Matthew. We just got to find Martin. There you are, Martin. That's all of us, isn't it? So yeah, we were nearly out of time, but I got one challenge for all of you, and I suppose it's who can think quickest as to who gets to go first. But we heard from all of you lots of hints and tips, and you had your 3 Ps, Robin, and other things. And if we had to write a checklist of things that you absolutely must do, and you have to distill it down to one thing. So there's your challenge. So it's almost like we've got 5 of you, and so we're going to have a checklist with 5 things. What would one thing for you be that's on people's checklist if they're trying to create these conditions for adoption? So we've heard from all of you about how crucial this is. It's, from right from the start in the strategy right through to what you do after, you've started to get people using a technology. But if you had to do one thing on the list, as it were, what would it be? And whoever can think of something first can respond first.
I'll go first, just in case anyone else has got my idea. So yeah, just in terms of communication, which is part of your framework, I mean, what we did differently for our project this time was we enlisted the help of the marketing team to help with the comms, because traditionally it was done by IT and it didn't always land that well. So marketing did this really good communication email for us, where they framed it as the kind of dashboard of dreams, which I probably wouldn't have come up with on my best day. And then also we got the champions group to encourage their teams to use the new dashboard, and they raised out their team meetings and they did a dashboard. And I just think I've kind of learned now that if the messaging comes back from the line managers, people pay attention, whereas if it comes from IT, they don't.
Great, thank you, David.
I might jump on the back of that one, David.
First. Go for it,
apologies, Matthew. People aren't taken for hearing me talk. I've been jabbering on for the last 10 minutes. But David, I thought I would just jump on the back of that one, because you're right. The way in which these communications are phrased is so crucial for people absorbing them. The other hint or tip I was going to give was just don't be afraid to remember you sometimes need to give that message on many different occasions. I think it's very easy, especially as technology professionals or people focused in this space, because we live, breathe it every day, to think everyone's thinking the same way. Whereas actually, I think the empathy and understanding that this is just one message that a lot of these users have heard in amongst other things. So don't feel guilty, or if anything, it's a gift to remind them on a number of occasions. And actually, sometimes that's what it takes to finally just let that message sink in. And we're all on the same side to do so. So yeah, lean on vendors like myself, or otherwise if we can help as well.
Great, thank you.
I'll piggyback off of that to go, as we can keep the chain going just on that. I think what that important piece there, as Robin talked about, is reinforcement. Any change management piece requires reinforcement. For me, the one thing that stand out, maybe coming at this from a slightly different angle, I'll vibe off of part of what Claire was talking about, actually. Change management can come down to something that is ultimately functional and objective orientated. But for me, the most important element here is the chance for us to be able to really focus on that human side of it. And you put it as what's in it for me in that slide where earlier, James, and that's exactly it. But I would kind of take a different approach to that, to say we have the opportunity in technology leadership and firm leadership to really set the scene of empowering how the future of work looks like. Change management is a mechanism to help support that. uncover the golden nuggets that really help to amplify people's passions and get them focused, working on and leveraging the things that they love and why they're doing the job in the first place. That, for me, is the number one outcome from this. If we can do that, then we are lighting up the energy behind the future generations, as well as everyone coming through the workplace now. And I think that's where the most powerful element of this sits in. And Claire demonstrated that from what she was talking about, which is it enables her to further what she does in the everyday, spend more time doing the things that she loves, tick the box of I'm happier, I can give better service, I've got more progression. I mean, do you want a better news story than that, really?
Great, thank you, Matthew. Much more sophisticated than mine. What's in it for me? Claire and Martin, that leaves you. Claire,
yeah, I'll go next, since mine is a little bit related to what Matthew said. For me, I think the one thing that really, really helped with the project was to get engagement from the group that it's supposed to help from the very beginning, so that they feel invested and they've in the outcome. And then also, so finding out their pain points, empathizing with them, and then keeping them, you know, appraised on what's going on with the project so that they can see full visibility of the project itself.
Great.
I mean, everyone's already said all the good points already, so I'll just try and claim ownership of everyone else's ideas. No, I do think if you're thinking being practical, communication is the most important thing. You need to make sure that the people that you're trying to serve are along for the journey, along the ride. But that ties into the core principle that Matthew, you were talking about, being human centric. We're not sending training out. We're not delivering technology out to robots. We're delivering these are all real people. They have, same as they have different goals and objectives and outcomes they're trying to achieve, and trying to understand that and deliver to that is so important when you're trying to do your engagement work, your communication work, your design work. All of that needs to be human centric.
That really useful. All singing from the same hymn sheet, which is really nice. But thank you all for your contributions. Cara, I'll hand back to you to help us wrap up. But yeah, as I'm still speaking, thank you all the panelists. Really, really insightful and interesting conversation over the last hour and a half.
Yeah. No, thanks, guys. Thanks so much for your time. And just to remind the audience that we do have 2 more days left of this exciting festival, so please do join us for those if you can do. But yeah, otherwise I think that's it. And so just thanks again, and continue with your projects. So yeah, thanks.